Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you speaking to compassion for everyone's different perspectives, and compassion for the fact that it's hard for the mind um, to sometimes hold things that are outside of the conditioned, um, repetitive constructs, programs I've been running. It's actually, it feels like death to the ego to go outside of what it's been used to thinking or referencing, and to expand to or consider a different perspective. It feels like literal death. So sometimes when we're presented with other perspectives, or we're being challenged, as we are in this time where we're realizing through the internet how close we all are together through technology, how we have more access to more information, to more of humanity, and are being challenged to receive so much information at once, and are being challenged to receive so much different perspectives. And it's really it can be really confusing. Obviously, it can even be distracting sometimes from finding truth, in the sense of what is real for us as a sovereign, authentic agent. What is true for me, when there are so many different ideas and everyone seems to be uh, spewing their ideas onto each other, maybe even sometimes vomiting a little bit, sometimes sharing. It all comes from a good place. It all comes from everyone's doing the best that they can. And I think as we evolve to hold more truth, more knowledge, something that's really important that we understand, I think, in this question of what is truth, is that truth is the underlying principle, the thing that's always there, regardless of if we believe in it or not. So truth is nature. It's the reality that gave birth to all beings, right? And it gave birth to all humans, and then along the way, as humans, we are conditioned with different cultural worldviews that create our experiences. And all of our experiences are real, because the mind is an infinitely imaginative thing that can create infinite real experiences. So everyone has their own truth of what's real for them. And then there's also a truth that's, I think, underlying the idea of this truth versus that truth, that says that they cannot exist together. And that's where I hear you talking about this challenge that we're being faced to hold multiple different truths or perspectives at once. And initially, I think this is the thing, the mind that's been conditioned to believe in one truth without much exposure to the reality that the other polarity could also equally be a real experience. If someone was born in that body, in that conditioning, and that would be equally as valid, the mind doesn't want to stretch over there, because um, it threatens the sense of solidity and identity that has held up this person's our sense of feeling safe and connected to whatever the conditions were that created that worldview. And we're all doing our best to adapt to a world that is filled with a bunch of people that see things differently, and are all doing our best to cope with that. So when we're presented with things that are differing than what we're used to, it can feel like death, and we can defend our truth to the death, and we can feel incredibly threatened by anyone that thinks otherwise, because it literally feels like we're going to die because we're identified with that story, rather than the underlying truth, rather than the realization that without a story of this versus that, we will still be alive, and we will still be safe, and we will still be, and so in some ways there's a fear of death that I see as a huge topic that feels juicy to go into. There's a big fear of death, and there's a big dying away of so much. Of course, there's so many people dying of COVID. of course, the old way as we know it seems to be dying. The old normal is dying. And so much more is dying that we don't really want to come to terms with as a collective, I see, which is, like I said earlier, it's all the ideas that we have that are defined as anything that are separate from the greater capital T underlying truth that is unified and that holds everything within it. And a part of this greater life that we're a part of is death. And death is a natural process of life. Like you said, as is a dying away of the old, there's a welcoming of what's new. But in my perspective, what is dying away is the perspective, is the mental perspective that there is one separate way to think of things or to see the world as opposed to another way. There's like an identity with a thought, and all these identities with thoughts and with ideas that separate us from each other, that are not founded in the underlying reality of nature, which is actually moves through all of us as a part of it, as one human family, where there is no separation, and where it doesn't matter if you see things as a Democrat, which is a word, versus a Republican, which is a word. Those are just words created by the same consciousness. Or whether you see things as V word versus non-V word, those are just words within the same consciousness. Whatever it is. And so life is a unified reality. And I think we're being challenged right now to see that the mind is not actually designed to hold on to just one solid way of thinking, even though that's the comfort mechanism, because that's all we've known as humanity up until now, is just this like, and then the revolution happens and a whole new world, and this cycle that happens over and over and over again. And we're going through another one of those on a larger scale than has ever happened before. This is the most immense, for those who can see it from an outside perspective, that are not holding on to the old way. We see that this is another process of evolution, just like we came out of the water, and we came out of the monkeys, and we came out of the humans, and we came out of the classical and Enlightenment and the Renaissance and the Civil War and the American Revolution and the hippie revolution. And it's just so if we can see that any idea of limitation that we think we have has been making way for a new way of seeing things, and we can see that the mind, I actually see as is designed on a deeper level to account for multiple perspectives at once, to account and hold the seeming paradoxes. And that's actually because we're actually multidimensional beings. We believe ourselves, the mind can contract in on itself and experience just one way of seeing things without an ability to see another way. But that's what causes suffering, because it's not in alignment with our true nature. And our true nature is far more expansive and not actually identified with this small little idea of who we think we are and what we've been taught we are. That is designed to break away. But what we'll see is that what we really are, and what we all have the invitation of stepping into right now, is that thing you were talking about, where you just slow down into the not knowing and kind of release the grasp on it having to be one way or one thing, and see that it's all the things as one thing, continuously in flux. And no matter what you try to hold on to, life will just show you that you can't. We'll bring in a new thing and a new thing, and we're always changing, and we're just having to come to terms with the fact that we can get with the program of that change, and we can observe life and what's happening in the world and all the different narratives and all the different perspectives. We can observe them from a more neutral place, a more spacious place of admitting that perhaps we don't know, and perhaps no one knows, even though everyone's pretending they know. And we can actually start to identify that all this trying to know and trying to argue isn't actually doing anything constructive on the deeper level, where life is actually trying to bring us down from the mind and from the arguing and from this perspective or that perspective, because none of that will matter at the end of the day. And what life is bringing us back down to is, hey, we're all here together, and all of this mental stuff is getting in the way of us really coming to terms with and facing the deeper truth, which is not some mental imaginary conception, which we're unfortunately, some of us can see that most of us are living our lives mostly in an imagination or a projection of life.
Mm.
And so the more we can kind of get out of the need to use the mind as we know it and to account for all the different perspectives and to see them as they all kind of show their faces without, and somehow hold space for them all to coexist together, somehow hold space for them to all be somewhat true on some level, and none of them to actually be true, and for the truth to be something emerging through all of us together.
Mm.
The more we can tune into the deeper truth, I think at this time, which is the life, the nature that holds all things and brings death to old ways that are not in congruence with her way, in which the trees are not more true than the plants and then the bushes and then the mushrooms and the animals, and everyone is together in an ecosystem. And I think we're coming down back to the ground from our minds and from our ideas and from our fights, and we're coming to a place of connection to nature and to listening to nature, perhaps, for the truth and the ways that she holds space for all to exist, for all to die, for all to rebirth without holding on to anything, and finding hopefully our own truth somewhere there that is in a place that's deeper than all the ways that we've been conditioned by humans that simply haven't matured enough on a collective level to come to terms with who we really are in this collective process of evolutionary stage, where we've been exploring as humans what it means to think of ourselves as separate things and to identify ourselves with our thoughts, rather than to drop that identity into the body, in which we are part of a field of unity that is ever fluctuating and now in a place of graduation from this old stage of identification with thoughts of polarization and separation, and experiencing ourselves more in this field of unknown, which holds all things within it, doesn't attach to any of the things, and is emerging with a much deeper intelligence that is much more unified and integrative than any of our ideas of how it can happen, or what is right, or who is true, or who is winning, or who is bad, or who is, none of that matters. And I think we're being humbled to face the fact that nature is much more powerful than that, and that we are part of this nature, and that when we align with that, then the process can be less less suffery than we think it has to be, when we can accept the death of our identification as something separate than nature, and see that as part of a process of rebirth that we're all going through as a collective, um, into a way of being that is not so much enticed or entertained by the mental shenanigans and fighting that we've been doing for so long, and sees that that only causes suffering
Mm.
to ourselves, and trusting in something deeper moving through all of us, even if it seems on the surface level like there's conflict between us. Just maybe there's something even deeper than that idea of conflict that we experience within us that is moving all of us together into a new way.
Mm. Wow.